Well, on our this week's edition of Unpluggered, we check in with Troy Schwarze, who played 71 games for the Saints between his arrival at the club in 1999 and the end of 2006. Played some terrific footy for the club, obviously noted for a particularly memorable moment that sticks in all of our minds from the clash with the Brisbane Lions in 2004 at what was then, I believe, Telstra Dome, in a huge contest during a period of great rivalry between those two sides, and went on to play some fine footy that year and over the coming years as well. Now applying his trade in the real estate game, having done a fair bit of coaching in local footy. Troy, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, boys. It's an honour to be on the show. I'm not one of the biggest names to have played for the club, but and I was certainly happy when you had Michael Klim on last week that I was happy to move myself around. You got to know your place, as some of my coaches used to tell me.
Now, being a December birthday, so we'll go back to the start of the journey. So you're obviously being born late in the year, your draft eligibility makes you one of the youngest players. And as I understand it, at the time of being recruited to the Saints, you were the youngest player on any list in the AFL. Can you sort of take us through what it was like going there? Because at the end of 98, they just sacked Stan Alves. They just appointed Tim Watson. So it was a little bit of a strange time, I guess, to be arriving at a club.
Yeah, I sort of didn't know any different in terms of what it was like when I arrived. And certainly there wasn't a lot of mention of Stan, even though they'd had a really successful period and probably should have won a flag in 97 and probably had the best team really out of any era that you've seen in recent times, barring maybe 29, 2010. The 97, 98 teams were bloody good teams. But, I got there as a 16-year-old, so I finished year 11 and I was actually on holidays with my parents and a draft note got sent to home in the mail. I think back then emails were a little bit foreign for people. So, so a letter arrived in the mail and we were in Queensland on an annual holiday that we do up to Queensland each year. And I think the neighbour was getting our mail and the neighbour called us and said, it was a letter from the AFL for Troy. And we got him to open it. It said, you've been invited to the draft camp, but we'd missed the cutoff date to respond. So I was pretty frantic that I didn't think I was going to get drafted anyway, but I wanted the opportunity. So, we quickly made some phone calls and got myself on the list of the draft camp and went and did the draft camp at, it was in Waverley. I think it was a police force. It was the academy, I think police academy. And that was a pretty grueling couple of days that we just got smashed out there. And Mark Williams from Port Adelaide was really interested in me. And I still thought nothing of it. And then St Kilda hadn't even spoken to me. And then draft day, they called my name out. So it was a big shock.
What was that draft day experience like in those times? We've spoken to a few different types of players, some from kind of before draft and some since then. But what was that day like for you?
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. So we were at home and we had a pretty humble house in Dingley, which wasn't far from Moorabbin. So St Kilda was probably, of all the clubs to go to, it was the most convenient because I was 16. I wasn't going to get my license for another year and a bit. So it was handy to go there. But I was sitting on the couch. I remember sitting on the couch at home. Mum was sitting next to me. I've got two brothers and they're both younger. They were at the back playing table tennis with my dad. And my name got read out and Mum just started screaming. And I sat there in shock, really, that my name had even been read out because I really hadn't thought a lot about it. And I'd only played 8 games in the TAC that year. And I played the last 8 games for Prahran Dragons, as it was then, and played pretty well in the finals in a couple of games in the MCG and still didn't really think much of it because I missed out on the list originally at Dragons. So to get drafted in the same year was pretty ridiculous when you look back. But, mate, the phone just went off the hook. Like, we still had the house phone, like mobile phones. I'm not even sure that Mum or Dad had a mobile phone. So the house phone just went off the hook and people were running in the house. By the end of the night, I think we would have had over 100 people at the house. I got thrown in the pool fully closed in the backyard. And I think there were people really drunk that night at the house. It was a bloody good night, but they're very unexpected.
Thrown in the pool in the middle of the night, that would have been a good introduction to going down to Moorabbin and the cold showers and everything there. That apparently never was warm water. So how was the getting to Moorabbin for the first time and soaking in? And how did you feel walking in there?
Just scared. talk about cold showers. It's funny because I was the youngest. I was waiting in the showers one of the first times, and it's pretty daunting. You're about to shower with Stewie Lowe or Spider Everett or one of these guys, and you've never met them. You've watched them on TV, and all of a sudden you've met them, and now you're expected to have a shower with them. And so I thought it figured, well, you've got to get naked, because if you don't, well, they're just going to grill you and they're going to give you a lot of grief. So I did that, but then I didn't realise that there was a pretty severe pecking order, and I was well and truly at the bottom of the pecking order. And we had cold showers after about, I reckon maybe 8 or 10 blokes got a shower, and then they went cold. And I'd wait, and each senior player would walk past me and they'd get to the shower first. And by the end, I'd have a cold shower, because that's how it was. And I was the youngest, so you just had to take your lot in life and cop a cold shower. But the first day was scary. I remember turning up to training. I was in school uniform because I'd been at school that day. I was doing year 11 at St Bede's and turned up to training in school uniform, and the boys gave me that much grief that from word go, they knew who I was, because I was the kid who turned up in school uniform to go to their first AFL training session.
Like the Angus Young routine for band practice. But obviously 99, the club started well and then obviously faded. You would debut in 2000 in round 4 in a game that we got absolutely hammered in at the MCG by Melbourne. But you would win a game that year. We'd only win 2 games that year, but you'd play in one of those, which was the week that Tim Watson announced his resignation. Can you sort of take us through 2000 when you got a bit of a look in, and I guess what that was like, having a coach quit in the middle of the year and obviously see out the rest of that season?
Yeah, it was strange. It was just unusual because the club had been so successful for 97, 98, and then really started 99. We were playing really well. And then we had a game against Hawthorn at Waverley where we were 10 goals up at half-time, or give or take. And we were flying. Tony Brown had 20-odd possessions to half-time. And apparently in the coach's box they were laughing. And second half we've come out and got rolled. And I think Hawthorn did the walk off the ground arm in arm maybe that game, which was pretty famous at the time. And I didn't play that game, but from all reports, the coaches were just having a laugh in the coach box. Tony Brown ended up on the bench. So for a bloke to have had 22 touches in a half and then end up on the bench in the second half was just, there was some unusual things happening. And so that, it was sort of hard for me to comprehend because it was all new to me. And I didn't really have anything to compare it to. I thought, well, this is AFL footy, this is how it is. And training was unusual. We were getting smacked, and then we'd go to training and just get flogged. Like, I'm talking full floggings at 5, 6 in the morning, and carrying dumbbells, carrying each other, full wrestling, full one-on-one games. Tim Watson's philosophy was if we weren't going to try on match day, we were definitely going to try during the week. So we would just get hammered during the week. And but it was funny because on the weekends we'd play, and then we'd all go and get drunk. And it was just a really strange culture that everyone we drank a lot of grog. And I remember thinking, is this really AFL footy? Like we seem to go out a lot. And it was just the era when people would just, you'd play and then you'd go and drink, and Transformers was still up and running, Wild Bills. And I think we were seen there more frequently than we were seen at games. But I debuted round 4 and actually played all right. And after the game, Tim Watson had 4 names on the board. My name was 1. And then the next week he came up to me and said, we're going to drop you. And that was pretty deflating because I thought, well, if you put my name up as one of the positives after we've been beaten by 14 goals or whatever we've been beaten by, why would I then be dropped the week after? And I think in today's game they wouldn't do that. They'd play a young guy for one game and they'd probably give him a couple of opportunities. And it was just a strange thing. And then he decided that we needed to go with a more experienced team against Richmond. I think it was the next week, and I think we got rolled. But it was strange times. But certainly playing your first game was unbelievable. I think your feet don't touch the ground. You run on the MCG to play an AFL game, and it's surreal.
I think we were 63 points up a couple of minutes into the second quarter of that game against Hawthorn. We had Tony Brown on the show about a month or so ago, and he kind of spoke about that feeling of the momentum turning and not being able to do anything about it when you're on the field. And it's just that was a really good chat actually. But I guess you mentioned coming to the club and there being that really well defined kind of pecking order. You were, or the pick that the club used on you in the draft was actually traded as part of the Matty Lappin to Carlton deal. And he was a pretty popular member of the club and the playing team at that time. What was I guess, through that period under Tim, there's been a lot of, I guess, talk and rumours around the playing group being fractured and that sort of stuff. What was it like as a young kid coming in and trying to, I guess, get your feet in that type of team environment?
I don't know if I wouldn't say it was a fracture. I think that everyone tried. Like we trained. Training, I remember being bloody hard, and I remember Harves, Lowy, Berkey, these guys just being animals on the track, and seriously fit guys who trained exceptionally hard. So I don't think anyone was fractured. I know Matty Lappin was a popular guy at the club, and I don't think there was ever a thought of me replacing him. And I'm not suggesting you're suggesting that, but it was just, I don't know, it just something wasn't right because we had enough talent, and we had the Wakelands, we had Spider, we had blokes still playing really good footy. I mean, Harves had just come off back-to-back Brownlows and was the best player in the comp. So we had some genuine stars, and Jason Heatley was still kicking goals at full forward. But it was just strange. It was, and I guess my draft year, Lenny Hayes was in my draft, Steve Baker. They both ended up being club legends, really. Well, Lenny particularly. Bates was a different type of player, but still played over 200 games, won at best and fairest. So to get that out of a draft crop, it was a pretty successful draft. They got James Begley, who ended up playing a few games and went back to Adelaide. Certainly when we came in, there was no thought of it being fractured and the players being upset that Stan being given the flick. I think, if anything, there were just stories about Stan's unusual coaching methods. But we're happy to get Tim, and Tim was a legend of the game. So I think everyone just thought it was just going to be a natural thing for him to go into coaching, and as it turned out, it wasn't.
So Tim leaves, and then Malcolm comes along and brings along Hamill, Gehrig, Stephen Lawrence, just to name a few of them, and then drafted Revolt, Kaczynski. The team virtually completely changed the way, if you look at it that way. We know it didn't go too well. You managed to get 4 games under Malcolm. How was the experience being coached by him? Was just completely different to anyone else you've ever had?
Well, he wasn't there, so it was just one of the most unusual things I've ever seen. We went from training a lot to he got appointed, and we did 3 days a week. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we did training at Monash in Clayton. So we drive out there in the morning and do weights on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and we drive back in the afternoon and do running. And the running was brutal. Like, it was just brutal running. Like five 1Ks was his thing. So we'd just work our way up to doing 5 1Ks on 7 minutes, and you had to average a time, and then you had to get close to that average every time, and it was bloody hard. But he wasn't there. So we used to joke that he was in a tree watching from a distance, or that someone was there. Like, it was literally a joke. We were full-time footballers, and we're training 3 days a week. So it wasn't really a shock when we came around to playing, and somehow we won the first game of the year. Then we played the Bulldogs and won. And everyone thought, Blighty's just the Messiah. Like, he doesn't even come to training, and we're winning games. And it quickly unravelled. I remember the funny story. I remember going into his office, and we had to go in for a review. And we'd heard all these stories about Blighty, and you walk into a dark room and he's standing on a ladder just abusing the crap out of the Adelaide players. And they're true stories. And so I went into his office one day, and he sat down and opened up. He didn't have a pen in his office, didn't have a bit of paper to write on. He had a landline phone and 2 books, and the books were AFL yearbooks, and they had every player in the competition in there. So I walked in, and I'm shocked that he knew my name, but he did. And he said, Troy, you play a bit like, and he opened up the yearbook to Richmond, which was just a random team. And he goes, you play a bit like Greg Timmender. He goes, well, even Mark Chaffee, you play a little bit like him, don't you? And I went, I don't know, do I? And he goes, yeah, I think you do. And that was it. That was the meeting. That was the feedback about how I was going as a footballer in a professional era. And I walked out going, what was that? Like, I had no idea. And it was just a complete farce. And really, I mean, he defends himself on radio now and on TV, but he cannot wholeheartedly look himself in the mirror and say that he was committed to the club. And we were just lucky that Grant took over when he did and harnessed a playing group where there was a bit of talent, and then quickly drafted Lee Montagna, Nick Del Santo, Matt Maguire, Xavier Clark, and it just turned the place around. And then Luke Ball, I think, might have been in that draft as well. So, Malcolm Blight era was just really, if I saw him down the street, he wouldn't know who I am. There's no way in the way.
The funny thing is, even though I don't see a direct comparison, when you said he opened the page to Richmond, I said, he's going to say Greg Tivendale. I don't know why. It just came that way. But when it's 2002, obviously, with Grant starting that year with his journey, we got to, and you were playing regularly at that point, you played 20 games that season, but the famous draw in round 5, you kicked a couple. I think it might have been the only 2 goals we kicked in the first half, I think, in that game. It ended up being an epic draw. Can you sort of take us through that? A bizarre tactical game, but we had about 1,000 players out injured, and you seem to sort of harness a bit of belief out of that.
It was pretty amazing. Grant had a really good rapport with the players, and he just sold us a vision of how we're going to play, and we're just going to defend. And we really had, we were decimated, and no one gave us a show. And we should have won. Daniel Wolf hit the post in the dying seconds, and if he kicks the goal, we win. And for us to have won that game, like even a draw felt like a win because we played so much better than them on the night. And I think I remember I kicked the first 2 goals of the game that night, and then it was just a dour struggle. But we just had this belief, and we had this young group that was starting to. We hadn't done anything at that point. I think we finished near the bottom again that year, but that night was unusual. Like we just decided the wings were going to roll back. We were going to have 2 less forwards, and we were just going to try and defend and hold on. And we just went out with the belief. And the longer we were in the game and in the contest, I mean, I remember we lost, and we were all just devastated that we didn't lose, but the draw was unusual because they're always weird to play in, but. The fact that we'd done so well and no one had given us a show, it was a really good. It was just a really good game for us to gain a bit of belief, I guess.
We've had a few of that team on this show before, and have spoken to a few of those guys. I guess, like you said at the top, probably a bit higher profile and probably a bit more well known type of guys, and have spoken a lot about the type of guy and the type of coach that Grant was. And we've had Grant on a couple of times as well. But what was it like playing under Grant as, I guess, one of those lesser fashionable or lesser light type players?
Grant was hard. He was no doubt about it. He was hard. He loved the club. And it's funny, I'm reading the Boys Club book at the moment. If you haven't read that, you should read it. It's actually not a bad read.
Great story. Great book.
But Grant Thomas talks about being in the room with Andrew Demetrio and telling him basically where to go. And they didn't get on. And Grant was sort of like that But I think Grant genuinely sort of liked me and maybe saw a bit of me in him in terms of the way he played. And he was frustrated with me sometimes, and he constantly worked with me on little things and effort. And if I didn't give great effort, he was really disappointed, and he sort of took it personally. I remember a game at the SCG. We're walking in the change rooms and we'd been beaten, and I think it was when we won 9 in a row or 10 in a row. We won 10 in a row at the start of 04.
Yeah. And
it must have been around 11 we played Sydney. And we famously went and watched a movie, which was called
Day After Tomorrow.
Day After Tomorrow. Anyway, shocking movie. But we went and watched a movie, and then we lost. And I remember after the game, he hip and shouldered me and walking through the rooms. And I thought to myself, that's weird. And he apologised to me. And he also got Heath Black after that game as well. And he lined him up and hip and shouldered him. And he apologised to me, but he didn't apologise to Heath. But he was like that. It was just how it was. He was volatile. He could give a great spray. But at the same time, he was the first to nurture us and cuddle us. And we'd go back to his house. We'd have dinner. Like on the drop of a hat, he'd have 45 guys at his house having dinner. And going from Tim and Malcolm, where, I remember joking to Tim in my first year, and I shouldn't have done it, but I was young and silly, and he was mentioning something about watching the Super Bowl all together. And I just said off the top of my head, I said, well, why don't we go to your joint, Tim? And Tim turned around to me and goes, mate, if you turn up to my house, Troy, you'll be sent on a train back to Dingley. And I'm like, oh, right, well, we're not welcome at your house then. But then going to Grant, who was just open door policy. Like, I really felt with Grant that if I had a problem at 3 a.m, I could have knocked on his door and he would have got up and made a cup of tea or a coffee and we would have sat down and talked about it. And that's I think, how most of the players felt with him.
Yes, but he had some very interesting coaching methods or just team methods, I guess. He had the first to really go with the overseas travel as a group, the rotating captain, a leadership group. He sort of brought those in. But one of the things a lot of people still wonder these days is did he hate ruckman that much?
Yeah, I don't know. I always used to joke the air was different once you got over 6'5", so they're all a bit special ruckman. I mean, look, we tried to get Dean Cox, I think, in 03 or 04, and imagine our team if we had got him.
End of 04.
So you look at that and you think, well, if we had him in 05 and we lost a prelim, and you'd argue that with him in that team, yeah, he's all Australian ruckman. So I don't think he underrated him. I think he rated him really highly, but there was only a few in the comp that he rated really highly. So he put me in the ruck against Sandlands one game because we had no ruckman. Everyone was injured. And he goes, you're going to ruck this week. And I remember rucking against Sandlands at centre bounce. I'm looking up at this giant just going, I'm 6'3". How am I going to get up anywhere near this guy? But he said, mate, just jump up and punch his arm. And the midfielders just get to his feet because the ball's not going to be hit anywhere if you punch his arm at the right time. So I don't think he didn't rate ruckman. I think he really did rate ruckman, but he only rated the really good ones. And really, when you look at it now, there's still only a few really good ruckmen in the comp. Some clubs have got a ruckman that really, they're not that great. They just have a ruckman because you're meant to have a ruckman.
A lot of ruckmen are great journeymen. You get a lot of ruckmen that play for 9 years at 4 clubs and play 53 games or something like that with that length of time in the system. There's plenty of them.
Well, you look at Hickey,
going around. Yeah,
look at Hickey, and Hickey would have been delisted 7, however many times over. But he goes to Sydney this year. He's nearly 30.
Yeah,
and he starts playing his best footy. And you do start playing your best footy when you're in your late 20s and 30. So it's just that he's so big that they've just kept giving him opportunities.
Now, obviously, 02, you played a lot of games. 03, we gradually got better as a group and just missed the finals. I think won 11 games that year. 04, we win the pre-season. I think we actually had a run, if you count pre-season. We won 18 out of 19 because we won 4 of our last 5 in 03, then all the pre-season games, then the first 10. But round 6 against Brisbane. So as I understand it, you weren't originally in the team, but Aaron Hamill was a late withdrawal. You played. You had 3 kicks, and one of them the most famous of your career, and one of them the most famous probably ever by a St Kilda player in a home and away game. And I just remember from that game personally, and I know the other guys might chime in as well, that it's the loudest roar I've ever heard, probably alongside Goddard's mark in the drawn grand final. If you watch the replay of the game, you can actually see the camera shake from the noise within the ground. But can you sort of take us through that piece of play? Because I get the feeling that everybody in the ground, when you got possession of the footy, thought you were a massive chance to kick in that.
I reckon no one in the ground gave me a chance. But the funny thing is, I wasn't meant to be playing. And then the morning of the game, I got a phone call saying that Aaron was out. I was going to play. So that's great. And I hardly played that night. I think I was on the bench for, it was just before rotations really came in. And so I'd spent most of the night running up and down the boundary line, keeping myself warm. So I think the only reason I kicked the ball so far was because I was so fresh. And no one else on the ground would have been able to kick it that far. But it was a strange night. I remember, it was a cracking game. It was just up and back, and it was goals, and it was, and Lenny at his best, and Rui, and, all these guys were just flying, playing great footy. And they were coming off, they'd won 3 in a row, so they were the big dog, and we were trying to take them down. And I remember I came on the last quarter, and I didn't even know where I got put. And they just said, you go on. So I thought, well, I'm fresh. I may as well run up and down and just try and get a bit of footy. But I remember Simon Black, I ended up on him at one point, and he went to push off me and turned around and just punched me straight in the face. And if there were cameras like there are now, he would have got weeks for it. And I remember chasing him for a minute. I don't know what I would have done if I'd have caught him. I couldn't fight my way out of a wet paper bag. But I remember chasing him, and he turned around to me and said, "Mate, I'm really sorry. Like I didn't mean to do it." And so I was seeing stars for a bit, and then Aussie kicked the point, and somehow I ended up on the wing. I might have been meant to have been playing wing. I'm not sure, but somehow the kick in came and it went to Heath Black, and then it went Heath Black to Brett Voss, and then Brett Voss out to me. And I didn't really think anything else. I just thought, well, I may as well have a shot. And I had a shot, and luckily it went through. And as I kicked it, I thought, geez, I hope someone wasn't on 20 metres out on their own. But because I'd have had tunnel vision for the goal, and thankfully it went through. And, the noise was ridiculous. So it was seriously the loudest noise I've ever heard in a football ground. And we just went off, and then everyone started into, we better get all the numbers back because there wasn't long to go, and we were a few points up, and the siren went, and we win the game. But, it was certainly weird. And the fact that I hadn't been on the ground much, Mum had actually gone home. So Mum was in the crowd, and my dad hadn't gone to the game because Dad didn't like big crowds and couldn't be bothered with the traffic. So he goes, I'll watch it on TV at home. And it's probably the only game he missed, really, because from then on he came to every game. And so I was shattered that he wasn't there. And then Mum was in the car park driving out. She heard it on the radio. She came back in and came to the change room crying. I said, what are you crying about? She goes, I missed it. So it was, it was quite funny.
Yeah, I was just having a quick look. It's 17% game time, so you would have been cold up until that point. And
I was fresh.
I can say I was directly behind the kick, and as soon as it was off the boot, it was going through. It went straight. So it was a very good kick. I knew it was through as soon as it was off the boot.
It's funny. I get so many people that come up to me even now and say that we're at the ground, and it's just it's weird because I must have a recognisable face because I haven't played for 15 or 16 years. I still get people pegging me going. I went to an appraisal the other day of a house in Sorrento, and as we were walking through the house, I saw a St Kilda jersey, and I thought, oh, that's a good sign. I might get the property here. And anyway, I thought I won't mention it because it's not my place to say, I played. And so I didn't say anything. And at the end of it, we were chatting about the house and what I think it's worth and how we're going to sell it, what method, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, can I shake your hand? I said, yeah. And he shook my hand and goes, thanks for kicking that goal in 04, mate. And it was just one of those, like, it still happens now. My boss is Swedish. He's got no idea about football and wouldn't know one end of a football from the other. And he looked at me and goes, what's this kick? And I'm like, well, I'll show it to you one day on YouTube. I've got it saved somewhere. Yes, anyway, there you go.
I'm not sure you're giving yourself enough credit. I reckon Parker's right that when that ball landed in your hands, I reckon most St Kilda supporters in the ground thought that you were a real shot at kicking that. If anything, you were known for being able to roost the ball, and I think we all kind of thought that you were a chance there. But you mentioned Aussie's point. It's probably something that maybe doesn't get mentioned quite as much as the goal. But what were you thinking at that point? Did you see it? What did you think at the time?
No, well, I was on the other side of the ground. And so where I ended up was where I was, I think, when the ball went through. And so I didn't actually see it go through for a point or out in the full, and I didn't think anything of it at the time. They called a point. And, you sort of get taught from a young age, you just play to the whistle or you play it out. And so if it's a point, well, then you just set up for a point. So I set up for a point, and thankfully Brisbane kicked it out the other side, and then it ended up with me on my own. And look, maybe I was meant to be defending, and that's why I was on my own, but I figured that we had to win the game. We were behind, so I'd rolled up. But as you said, I had 17% game time. I was pretty fresh, and when I got it, I guess I had the fresh legs, and I could kick a footy, and that thankfully that night it came off.
Would have earned you a few beers around Moorabbin in the following weeks.
I don't think we didn't drink much after that. It was funny that era we really didn't drink. I remember going like months on end without having a drink, and it was sort of strange. We went from 99 2000 where we really drank a fair bit, and after games we'd have blokes walking off going, let's get twisted, and we'd end up at Twisted at all hours, and then recovery the next morning. And there's some funny stories about recovery. I'm not sure if I can tell them, but Stephen Baker one morning drove to recovery, and he was driving on the footpath to the King Club in his old VL Commodore, and he went home, went to bed, woke up and thought he'd missed rehab, and he'd been swimming in a pool. So, that was the sort of stuff that was going on. Like, it was just, and even even Stevie Baker, who I love, like he's just a legend and still one of my best mates. But one of the first training sessions, he got on the grog with Barry Hall in our first year. And I remember Barry trying to wake him up. Barry couldn't wake him up. And I remember Tim Watson just pulled him over the coals and just said, mate, if you think this is the way it is. And Barry Hall threw a bucket of water over him in his bed to wake him up and couldn't wake him up. He was that drunk. And so that was sort of the start of my career. So, but by 2004, we really weren't drinking that much. And I remember we had a drink after we won the Wizard Cup. But then from then, we had the week off after it. And then really after that, we really didn't drink much until we had a break again. So it was it really changed. Professionalism changed a lot really quickly.
It's amazing too what Aaron was talking about before with your 17% game time. In that game, 11 players played 100% game time. That doesn't happen with anybody these days, but 11 players on the ground across both sides had 100% game time. But you'd play 17 that year, including a final against Brisbane where we got a bit of a touch-up, and 05 and 06. Thought 06 you were playing some of your best footy. You went forward, you kicked a few against Port, you were looking pretty steady. Can you sort of take us through how that came to an end? 2006 was a bit tumultuous. Grant Thomas would end up losing his job as well. And I think most St Kilda supporters, and certainly I was one, I thought you were a near certainty to get another contract during that year.
Yeah, I thought I was as well. I had a contract on the table and probably stupidly didn't sign it because it all happened quick. And I think it was quite political the way Grant was sacked. And there was a falling out of friendships, and he probably tells it differently. But I think that, the blokes that sacked him, really, he was sort of gunning for them and they were gunning for him, and they had more power than him and they could sack him. So they did. But it was certainly a strange time. I remember that we were on, 2006, I think I played 13 in a row. And I might have missed the first round, but I played a preseason game against West Coast where Grant made me play 100% game time. And we played West Coast at full strength over there, and we took half a team. And he made me play the whole game, and I actually played really well. And after the game, he came up to me and shook my hand and said, mate, I can't believe you played the whole game in that. It was like 38 degrees or something. And he didn't give me a break, and it was all about toughening me up. And it worked. I mean, I went out in the VFL the first week, didn't get picked in the AFL, which I was disappointed about, but went out in the VFL and I was clearly best on. And so they had to pick me the second week, and then, or whatever it was, second week or third week. And then I played every game. And then I did my hamstring against Hawthorn, and that was it. And from there, it was only a little hamstring, but it was every time I nearly got back to playing, every 3 weeks I'd be close to getting back and I'd do it again. And so I did that 3 times, re-injured it 3 times. And I remember sitting in the stands in 06, we were decimated with injury in Melbourne. We got us in a final at the MCG, and I was sitting in the stands watching, and I think Hamill was watching, Kazitsky. We had quite a lot of good players sitting in the stands not playing, and Melbourne got us, and the rest is history. But then Grant got the sack on the Monday, and we were on our I think we're on the Mad Monday or the Tuesday, one of the two. Grant got the sack, word came back to us that he'd been sacked, and we just couldn't believe it. Like we were literally in a state of shock. And half the playing group went to his house, and the other half didn't know what to do, because we were like, well, do we want to go to his house or do we not want to be seen there? Because we weren't sure who was in control. And then we went to the club the next morning, and they said, oh, yeah, Rod Butters got up and said, oh, we sacked Grant, and you've got to take the emotion and remove from the decision. And, we know you blokes are close with him, but it was all about this. And it just seemed weird at the time. And then Brett Voss said to him, well, what are you going to do about players in their contracts? And they hadn't thought about it. And they had no answer, because Grant was doing all the contracts at the time. And they said, oh, we'll come back to you on that. And really at the time I should have signed and just gone, you know what, I've got a 1-year offer, I'll take it, and we just move on. But I didn't sign it. And then Ross Lyon turned up, and my first training session, I wasn't the greatest long distance runner. We did a distance run first up. I came in last. The next morning at training, I was in there, and I got a message doing weights from the weights coach saying, oh, they want to see you upstairs. And I just thought, oh, they want to sign me up, because I had a contract there. And we were just negotiating bonuses per game. And I think I had a base salary of 60 grand or something. It wasn't a lot of money in today's footy, but it was an offer, and I was happy to sign it at the 60 plus games. And then I just wanted bonuses. If I played 15, 18, 20 games, that I got X amount of bonuses, which was pretty straightforward and standard. And when I walked upstairs, Ross followed me into the room. I thought, it's a bit strange that the coach is following me in to talk about my contract. And then he said, yeah, we're going to sack you. And it was pretty brutal. He walked out of the room. Kenny Sheldon had just come into the club and he wasn't involved previously, I don't think. And they were just, it was a pretty cold discussion where it was just, we know you've been here for a while, but we're not going to go with you. We want to go with someone else. And I remember going downstairs at Moorabbin and I was upset. I walked out to the car park and slid around the back of the car park into the change rooms, got my locker, just grabbed my keys out of the locker, ran to my car and just drove home and left everything else at the club. And I ended up calling one of the boys and said, mate, I think I called Jason Blake. I said, Blakey, can you clean my locker out? He goes, what are you talking about? I said, mate, I need all my stuff. I've been sacked. And he goes, what? And then Lenny got home. So I was living with Lenny at the time and Lenny was ropeable. And Lenny got home and I was sitting there. He goes, what are you doing? I said, mate, I've just been sacked. And he goes, he was like, I don't know, can I swear on this? But he just said, oh, you're fucking joking. He goes, and he couldn't believe it. He goes, they make us take pay cuts and they sack blokes like you and blah, blah, blah. And it was just one of those things that happened. But as it turned out, probably a blessing because I ended up in Sorrento and the rest is sort of history. But Grant Thomas helped me get to Sorrento. So it was sort of funny that Grant got the sack and then just after that, Grant called me and said, what are you going to do? And I said, mate, I don't know. I was sort of planning on playing footy for another year or two. And he goes, well, I know the bloke that owns the Sorrento Hotel. And he said, there's worse places to live than Sorrento. Why don't you go down there and have a look around and see what you think? So I ended up driving down and I've stayed here ever since and I'll probably never leave. It's a pretty good lifestyle.
Now, one thing with the team lists and contracts and all that sort of thing, and at one point your brother came on to the list just as a rookie. Never got to play senior football with him, which obviously would have been something you would have loved to have done, I'm sure, at some point. And he stayed on for a couple of years, then headed off to North and played senior.
Yeah, well,
did the two of you ever go, we sit down and think, well, we wish one of those games at least had been in the red, white and black for both of you?
It's funny. We played in, I think, 4 premierships together at Sorrento. And we loved those times. And it was just, it was great fun. And but we don't really sit down now and talk about AFL much at all. It's funny. I had beers with him. I probably shouldn't say we're in lockdown, but I might have snuck around to his house and had a beer on the weekend. But we just don't talk about it. It's just it's funny. It's weird that we were both on at the same time. It's unusual. And Lee Fisher's actually our cousin, and Lee's so Lee was my dad's sister's son, and so he's a first cousin. And I think at one point we were all on the list, maybe together, which I don't need to look back on, but I think we were all there at the same time, which was strange that from the one family we're all there. So it's we don't look back on it now, but it was great that he got to go to North and ended up playing 11 games, I think, and made a bit of a name for himself there.
Yes, last one from me, mate. It's a little bit of a two-parter, but your first year at St Kilda, you played in the 99 reserves grand final, and there are a couple of handy players on that Essendon list that beat us in that grand final, including Stephen Milne. And I was watching a few of those highlights of the game a little bit earlier, and you were in a few of them. Did you line up on Milne at all that day? And I guess the second part of that question is in those first few years when you were kind of in and out of the team as that halfback, running defender type thing, you copped a bit of flack from the supporter base and I guess the footy community. What sort of impact did that have on you as a young bloke?
Yeah, it wasn't easy. I remember the 2004 Wizard Cup. I don't think the supporters weren't really into me at that night because I got booed when I got up and got my medal, which was strange. And I remember being booed, and I was like, it was just weird. And I thought, well, geez, my days might be numbered here if people don't like me. And it was sort of strange, but that's the way fans were. And I guess everyone's got an opinion, and I guess the majority of opinion was I wasn't that great. But it was funny. The 99 grand final, they had a great team, and we'd had a good year in the twos, and I guess it reflected the fact that we probably finished poorly in the seniors, and a few senior blokes were playing in the twos, which probably improved our side. But Milne's mum was in the crowd, and she screamed out, "That's my boy! That's my boy!" And Milne's ended up being one of my best mates, but we still give him grief for that. And because the next year he turned up at training and everyone was a bit like, we don't like this bloke. And he just beat us in a grand final. He was just trapping the whole game, and you couldn't shut him up, and he's kicking goals out of his arse. And we quickly worked out that he did that pretty well and did it most weeks. But yeah, it was strange that he's ended up being a really close friend. And I caught up for dinner with him and Dell just before the last lockdown. There was Schneid's was in town because they were in town to his GWS, and Blakey was there, Lee Montagna, Bakes, Milne, Farron Ray. So a few of us got together and had dinner, which was nice. But yeah, Milne's is a bad man to play against and probably a pain in the ass to train with, to be brutally honest. But yeah, good bloke to have around the club. Mate, Milne was funny at training. Like we'd have ice bars in the shower, and we had the old wheelie bins, and we didn't have the greatest facilities in Moorabbin. So yeah, we'd have the wheelie bins full of ice, and you'd after training do an ice jump in the ice bin and then hot shower, and you'd go in the shower and Milne would be in the wheelie bin with the lid closed, and a bloke could get into the shower and you'd kick the bin and he'd come shooting out and scare the life out of whoever was in there. And that was just his running joke. Or he'd be sliding naked through the showers with soap on he put soap all over the ground. Next minute, Milne's sliding through the showers on his back. But a bit like Alex Rance, who did it, I think famously, it was all over the internet. But Alex Rance is a little bit behind his time. Milne's been doing that for years.
You'll have to have a word to Bakes for us, because I've been trying to get him on the show for a couple of years now, and he always pikes pretty late in the process. He says yes, and he goes, "Nah, I don't want to do it. Don't want to. Well, I hate media."
Well, I mean, it's not even media, really. I think you guys
exactly
it's fun. Like, I mean, I think that Bakes. It's funny. Last night, Bakes put a post on of me. I got a message off him a couple of days ago and goes, "Mate, can you send me a profile picture of yourself?" I'm like, "You want a profile picture of me?" And so I sent him a screenshot of me in a suit, and he wrote back, "Not a screenshot, dickhead, a real one." And I'm like, "Okay, no worries." So I sent him I said, "Give me your email address." I emailed it to him. And last night it comes up in my newsfeed that he's put a post up saying, "If you're looking to buy a property on the peninsula, Troy Schwarze is your man, blah, 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 blah." I couldn't believe it. And I sent back to him, I think I sent him a message saying, "I love you, mate." And that's the sort of stuff he does. But you need to get him on. I'll call him after this and say, "Mate, the boys are going to get you on. It's a good thing. They can have a laugh. They can ask him about driving to training and not knowing you drove and driving on the footpath." And then, there's so many funny stories with Bakes. We could literally write a book about some of the things that he used to get up to. But not knowing who players were, like he was just the most brutal player to play the game. I would have hated to play against him. And when you look at someone like Gary Ablett Jr., never wanted to play on him because he was genuinely scared of him. And Bakes was an animal and would do horrible things to opposition players, but he'd do anything for us. And he was just he was everything you want in a teammate. And I remember Grant Thomas just loved him because he was just as tough as they come, and he'd run through a wall for his mates and played injured a lot, and just it was like he had no pain. But now he's starting to pay for it. He's had a hip replacement. His knee's not great. His shoulder, he needs a shoulder reconstruction. But you know, get him on. He's just a legend of a bloke. But the problem is, I think that even he doesn't know where he's going to be from 1 hour to the next during the day.
Yeah.
So
I remember him.
He probably doesn't want to commit. He probably doesn't want to commit because he's like, I might be with Warnie on the Gold Coast playing poker. I might be back at Colac with Mum. He's been single his whole life, so he could be anywhere. I told him a month ago that I'm coming up to Melbourne. Do you want to get breakfast? And I called him, and he was in bed. It was 10 a.m., of course. He's still asleep. And I said, "Bakes, what are you doing?" He goes, "Well, what are you doing?" I said, "Remember, we're going to get breakfast?" He goes, Oh, well, I'll get up then." I'm like, "What?" So that's just him.
Well, Troy, thank you very much. It's been great sharing that journey with you, obviously reflecting on some of those good times and not so good times as well. But you did leave a very much a lasting legacy at the club, and obviously a memory that will sit with St Kilda fans forever. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, boys. It's a pleasure to come on, and I'll send Bakes a message now saying that he's got to jump on with you guys one night. And you'll certainly get a laugh out of him, and hopefully he's had a couple of drinks before he jumps on, and he'll tell you some funny stories.
Sounds like that's inevitable.